this question. Okay, that was the last question. It says that A is CH3CH and it's Br, and just so A is CH3CH, Br, CH2 and CH3. Just hold on 1 second. So some reactions of A are shown. There's reaction one, which is what's happening here is that NaOH is being added. So if NaOH is being added, it has an OH. It has an OH nucleophile. And halogenoalkanes, if you remember halogenoalkanes had a reaction with OH ions. For example, this molecule over here is CH3. There is CH, and there is a Br, and there is CH2 and CH3 on the other side. That's the molecule. Now, if you have this molecule, the carbon in the middle has a very strong partial positive charge. Uh, and this is a secondary halogenoalkane. This is partial negative. So it was a nucleophilic substitution reaction in which what could happen is that the OH minus 1 nucleophile can attack the positive carbon atom, and the electrons over here in the Br would be knocked out and they would be repelled. So the OH would substitute the Br, and that is exactly what's happening here. If you look at the molecule, you would notice that the OH has substituted the Br. And then it's a secondary alcohol. Secondary alcohols, they do get oxidized. So it's a secondary alcohol. What happens to secondary alcohol? That secondary alcohols, they get oxidized to ketones. So this one is CH3, then there is CH, and then there is OH and CH2, CH3. So it's going to be oxidized. Why is it a secondary alcohol? Because the carbon over here is bonded to two carbon chains. And secondary alcohols, they always get oxidized to ketones. So it would be CH3, C, it would become double bond O, and it would be CH2 and CH3. So a ketone is going to be formed. So remember, primary alcohols, they change into aldehydes and then carboxylic acid, whereas secondary alcohols, the one that you see over here, that would change into a ketone group. And the next one is there's another reaction of halogenoalkanes, and let me also simultaneously open the halogenoalkane board so we can go through all the reactions. If I can find that, just a second. So it's probably one of these. Just a second. So I think this was the halogenoalkanes board. Let me label it. So this was a halogenoalkane board. The reactions that halogenoalkanes underwent, uh, you had the reaction in which alcohols would change into halogenoalkanes. This is just revision. And then you had nucleophilic substitution reactions that if you have a halogen, it's going to get substituted by either OH or CN or NH3, and the relevant conditions are given. And you had the mechanism of primary halogenoalkanes, which had a one-step reaction in which the OH would attack the carbon directly, and then you had an SN1 mechanism, which was for tertiary halogenoalkanes, where the OH would come in later. A carbocation would be first formed, and then the OH minus one is going to come in and bond with the carbon atom. And then you had one other reaction, which is probably not given in the on one of the probably on some other board, and that is the elimination reaction. The elimination reaction is that NaOH ethanolic is used instead of aqueous. And if you use NaOH ethanolic, what happens is that an alkene is formed. an elimination reaction happens. And how is an alkene formed? The Br is lost. The Br is removed from one of the carbon atoms, and the H is removed from the neighboring carbon atom. So it could be on the right side, or it could be on the left side. So you're going to get three different types of alkenes. You would either have double bond forming on the right side, or you would have a double bond forming on the left side of the carbon atom. This one over here would have two different molecules, cis and trans, because the double bond would appear right in the middle. So there would be a cis version and there would be a trans version, whereas the other one, it's not going to have cis and trans versions because the double bond carbon is bonded to two hydrogens. So this last reaction where C4H8 is being formed, that's an elimination reaction. So name the class of compound to which B belongs. So B was a ketone. The class of compound is carbonyl. And there are three structural isomers of A. I mean, this was, uh, so they were saying there are three structural isomers of A. And we can draw the three structural isomers of A over here. It's you basically have four carbon atoms and there's a bromine. Now they've drawn bromine on the second carbon atom. We can draw a bromine on the carbon at the end. That's one option. Or we can have the carbon atoms branched, and we can have bromine on the carbon at the end, or we can have bromine on the carbon in the middle, and you can add in the hydrogen. So these are the three possible isomers possible for A for the compound that's given over here. Okay, is this clear? Mohammed, is this clear? Mazra, is this clear?
Yes.
Sir, sir, the Br could be on the branched carbon too. That would be an isomer as well, right?
This one?
Yes.
That would not be an isomer. That would be the same molecule, just a rotated version of that. Okay, you have to be careful with that. If the Br is over here, that's not an isomer. I mean, because these two are exactly the same. The connectivity is exactly the same. The Br is bonded to a carbon atom, which is bonded to a carbon atom that's bonded on two sides with
Also,
a.
yes.
This one
Yeah,
is Br,
okay. Yeah.
so it's exactly the same. Okay. So so these two are the same, right? And then you have what's the last page? The last page is reaction one occurs by two different mechanisms at the same time, SN1 and SN2. S stands for substitution, N stands for nucleophilic. And this was the secondary halogenoalkane. I mean, this one over here was a secondary halogenoalkanes. For them, SN1, SN2 depends on the type of conditions used. So you can't really tell whether it's SN1 mechanism or SN2 mechanism, which is exactly what the question was also stating that that it could have two different mechanisms. And he's saying complete the SN1 mechanism for the reaction. Now, in SN1 mechanism, what would happen is that the Br is going to get knocked out first. So why and what was the logic behind the SN1 mechanism? The reason was the strength of this positive charge on the carbon atom. I mean, it's a polar bond. But in tertiary halogenoalkanes, you used to have SN1 mechanism. Why? Because the carbon chains, the the two carbon chains in tertiary halogenoalkanes, you have three carbon chains. If you have so many carbon chains around, the positive charge kind of gets neutralized, and it doesn't really attract the OH minus one. So in the first step, the OH minus one is not really attracted because of the electron donating effect of the carbon chains. The bond breaks, and a very stable carbocation is formed, which is this one. And the Br minus one breaks off. And again, why does the Br minus one break off easily? Because the positive carbocation is surrounded by carbon chains. So it can get electrons from other places. I mean, it is surrounded on all sides by big groups with lots of electrons. So the positive charge would kind of get neutralized and it would have a very low charge density. So it's not going to attract the Br minus one. So the Br minus one could easily leave. And if the OH ion concentration is sufficiently high enough, then the chances are that the OH ions would come in, bringing the electrons, since they are a nucleophile, and they can bond with the carbon atom to form an alcohol. So that's your SN1 mechanism. And SN1 mechanism for reaction 1 is repeated using this or this in place of this. Stay to explain how the rates of these two reactions will compare with the rate of the original reaction. Now, the rate of the reaction for halogenoalkanes depended on the strength of the bond. Uh, for example, CF had very slow reactions because it's a strong bond. Small atoms, they always form strong bonds. But on the other hand, if you have I is a big atom. That's a very weak bond. So it easily breaks and it has a fast reaction. So this is exactly what you're going to write. And this one is going to be a slow reaction. I think they were not talking about CF. They were actually talking about there's a CCl bond, a Ci bond, and a CBr bond. So you have to put them in order. So ignore the F. Just compare CCl, CBr, and Ci. Ci is going to have the fastest reaction. And actually, we can convert that into, so let's make it CCl. So CCl is going to have a strong bond and it's going to have a slow reaction. Okay, is this clear? Ethan, is this clear? Pascal, Minahil, is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then you have reaction 2 uses the same. Okay, reaction 2 uses the same reagent as reaction 1 but under different conditions. State two differences in the conditions needed to ensure that the reaction 2 is more likely to take place than reaction 1 when this reagent is added. So what you do is that halogenoalkanes always had uh, two things going on. If it's NaOH aqueous and reflux, it's going to form an alcohol. If it's NaOH ethanolic, then it would form an alkene. So the difference was in one case, water was used as a solvent, and in the other one, alcohol was used as a solvent. NaOH was ethanolic for an elimination reaction. So let me just check what other condition are they asking for. One would be, apart from that, this is which paper? It's I think we had the marking MS. TK, just quickly checking whether the last one has any other thing. No, not this one. So it's heat and reflux ethanol. That's the other condition that was used. That you're going to use reflux. So that's the entire paper complete. Now we're going to start with the other paper, which is paper 1-3. Just a second. It's so I think this one. So let's start with. I'm going to do the paper in reverse. We're going to do the. Let's start in the right order. Just a second. So this one, starting with the first page. Take it out. This is an MCQ paper. The first one is you can use the data booklet. Why is the boiling point of NH3 higher than the boiling point of phosphine? So that's a very easy answer. What's the answer to this? Like why does NH3 have high boiling points?
It has hydrogen bonding.
Okay, so it can have hydrogen bonds, right? So ammonia molecules are polar, phosphine molecule is not polar. Phosphine molecule is also polar, except that it's not that polar. Okay, so N is more electronegative. So it's going to be B. That hydrogen bonding would be significant, whereas phosphine molecules do not. Next one is Neutrons are passed through an electric field. The mass of one neutron relative to 1/12 the mass of a C atom, and any deflection in the electric field is recorded. Which row is correct? Behavior of the beam of neutrons, and they pass through an electric field. They don't have any charge, which basically means that they're not going to get deflected. So that's uh, so it's either C or D, and the mass of the neutron is going to be 1. Then you have to talk about the orbitals. The table refers to the electron distribution in the second shell of an atom with 8 protons. Uh, so 8 protons, that's oxygen. What's the electronic configuration? It's going to be 1s2, 2s2, and 2p4. So the second shell is going to be S and P. So it's going to be C. Not C actually. It's going to be B, because this is your P with 4 electrons, and the S, I mean, you have to look at the shapes as well. So it's going to be B. Then the next page is so now the next page is which statement describes the bonding between carbon and hydrogen atoms in an ethene molecule? So you have to describe the bonding in an ethene molecule. Remember, in ethene, whenever carbon is making, it's bonded to 3 atoms, it is sp2 hybridized. What that means is that carbon would be fan shaped. Its 3 orbitals would be making a bond. The fourth one would be available for pi bonding. So if you look at any one of the carbon atoms, for example, this one, 3 of the orbitals would be pulled in different directions by the atoms, and they would be making bonds. Whereas the fourth one is going to be available for pi bonding, and they would overlap above and below the axis connecting the two. That's connecting the nuclei. So they would all be bonded together. So so he's saying which describes the bonding in carbon and hydrogen in ethene molecule. So it's sp2 orbitals, sp2 hybrid orbitals. So it's either A or C, and it's going to be a sigma bond actually, because he's asking for the bonding between the carbon and hydrogen atoms. It's this one over here. So those are your normal sigma bonds. These are your normal sigma bonds. One bond being formed over here, one sigma bond over here, one sigma bond over here. The pi bond is formed between the 2 carbon atoms. So he's not asking for that. He's asking for the bonding between the carbon and hydrogen atoms. Okay, is this clear? Mohammed, is this clear? And
Yes.
and just to describe, go a little deeper into hybridization. If carbon is bonded to 4 atoms, and it would be forming 4 single bonds, 4 sigma bonds. That's sp3 orbitals. Carbon has 4 orbitals. They all would change shape, and they would form sp3 hybrid orbitals. And then sp hybridization was when carbon was only bonded to 2 atoms. So that meant that there were 2 orbitals that were available for pi bonding, because carbon has a total of 4 orbitals. So it would either form a double bond, another pi bond over here on both sides, like carbon dioxide, or it might form a triple bond on one side and a single bond on one side. So that was sp hybridization, when carbon is only bonded to 2 atoms. Now the next molecule is aspirin. Is MRS-180, can be made by a reaction between 2-hydroxybenzoic acid, MR-138, and ethanoic anhydride, the Ballast equation. So the equation is given, and the reaction mixture consists of 10 grams of each of the 2 reactants. What is the maximum mass of aspirin? So you're given this is a limiting and excess reaction question. So you're given 10 grams of both. Can anyone tell me what the moles are? Like C7H7, he's given you the MR as well. What's 10 divided by 138? And C4H6O3, that MR is where is C4H6? That's 102. Can anyone tell me
The
what
0.0725.
0.0725 moles?
Yes, sir.
What about this one?
0.098.
So that means this is an excess. You never use excess moles, okay? Because 0.0725 would react with 0.0725, not react with 0.09. So you're going to use the moles of this substance, and you're being asked to
Sir,
find
your
the.
voice has become quite distant.
You can just 1 second. Clear है Bhaskar?
Better.
I said so you're going to use 0.0725 moles, right? It's uh that's the limiting reactant. You always use limiting reactant moles, never the excess moles, because they're not taking part in the reaction completely. So it's 0.0725 moles. Uh, and they're going to produce, which one was aspirin? Aspirin was C9. This is aspirin. So the moles of aspirin would also be 0.0725. And you can just multiply it by the MR and you can find the mass. The MR of aspirin is also given, that's 180. So what's the answer?
C.
Chalo, theek hai. C is the answer. Then you have which, about this, always remember never to use excess reactant moles. theek hai? They're not taking part in the reaction completely. The next part is the diagram correctly describes the behavior of a fixed mass of an ideal gas. You know what the relationship is. It's PV is equal to nRT, uh, which means you can figure out all the relationships. For example, volume and temperature are directly proportional. So volume is directly proportional to temperature. So that's going to be a straight line. So A is correct. I think it's correct. Uh, Pressure and volume are inversely proportional. So that's incorrect. Inverse proportionality is like this. PV versus P is always a constant. It's a constant. Remember, PV versus P is a straight line because if temperature is constant, because N and R are already a constant because it's a fixed mass of a gas. So the moles are constant, the temperature is also a constant. So PV would always be a constant no matter what pressure. And PV versus V would also be a constant because if all of this is a constant, if N, R, T are constant, then PV would always be a constant. So if you're keeping the temperature constant, the mass of the gas is a constant, which means the moles are constant. So PV would always be a constant. So it's going to be a straight line. So C and D are also incorrect. So only A is the one that's correct. And so then next page is now you're given a reaction, you have to find the enthalpy change of that particular reaction. You're given the enthalpy change of formation of everything. So if you're given the enthalpy of formation of the reactants as well as the products, so if you're given the enthalpy change of the reactants as well as the product, the formula for that enthalpy change of reaction is that it's going to be the enthalpy of formation of the products minus the enthalpy of formation of the reactants. Okay, so this is the Hess law formula, which you can simply apply. And if you apply this, what's your product? CuCl2, that's 808. So it's going to be minus, you have to be very careful with the signs, minus the reactants. The reactants are H2O and CuC. So the reactants are H2O and CuCl2. So it's minus 286. And the other one is, and minus 286 and would be into 2 because you have two water molecules. And the other one is minus 206. That's only one. So that's product minus reactants. What's the answer that we're getting?
D minus 30.
Okay, so that's going to give you give you D. Now remember, most Hess cycle questions would be like this. They would be very simple. So if enthalpy of formation of the reactants and the products is given, you just have to do product minus reactants and you're going to find the enthalpy of that particular reaction. Vice versa, if enthalpy changes of combustion of everything in the reaction or equation is given, then you can do enthalpy of combustion of reactants minus enthalpy of combustion of products, and that would give you the enthalpy change of the reaction. So most energy cycle questions can be solved using these two formulas. Now the next one is there's XeF6 and it reacts with water. Which statement is correct? Hydrogen is reduced in this reaction. So is it getting reduced? There's H which is +1 and there's H which is still +1. So nothing is happening to it. And I think it's not a redox reaction in the first place because Xe is +6 over here. Like fluorine is -1. Fluorine is always -1. So there's 6 fluorines. So Xe must be +6. And over here there are 3 oxygen. Oxygen is -2. If it's -2, then again Xe must be +6 because there are 3 oxygens. So this is not a redox reaction. So it's D is the answer. Okay, they already gave an option D, not a redox reaction. The next part is he's saying which conditions would most favor the formation of hydrogen gas. You want more hydrogen gas. You want the equilibrium to go in the forward direction. And it's an endothermic reaction. When are endothermic reactions favored? High temperature, low temperature? I mean, what's the
High temperature.
High.
Le Chattel principle is that high temperatures they favor endothermic reactions. That's one. And then this side is the more gas mole side. Remember, count the gas moles. On the forward side, there's more gas. In the backward side, there's less gas. You want the reaction to move forward, more gas. So low pressure or high pressure?
Low pressure.
Okay, so low pressure produces more gas. Just give me 1 minute. I have to attend a call. Just 1 minute. So this one is going to be probably C. Okay. So this one is C. Let's move to the next part, which is going to be. Let's move to page 5 now. So this one, the following concentrations are found to be at equilibrium under certain conditions, and you're given certain conditions. What is the numerical value of Kc? That's easy. You're already given the equilibrium concentrations. You don't have to actually find the equilibrium concentrations. So they've pretty much given you the values. What you just have to do over here is write the expression for Kc, which is going to be products over reactants. It's going to be NH3 concentration, and that's going to be squared. And the whole thing would be divided by the concentration of N2 and H2. So it's going to be N2 concentration into H2 concentration, which is going to be cubed. So put in the values and find, so NH3 is 0.6, so that's 0.6 squared. The other ones are N2 is 0.2. And the third H2 is 0.3. And that is cubed. So can anyone tell me what the value is? And be very
66.67.
Okay. And again, I'm insisting that be very careful with your calculators. Use brackets very intelligently. Calculators get confused a lot in multiplication and division. So make sure that if you're using a calculator, make sure you clearly tell the calculator that this thing is being divided by this thing by putting brackets. Now the next one is there's this enzymes maltase speeds up the reaction between maltose and water, and maltase shows specificity. Which statement describes the specificity of maltase? So what is specificity? If you have the enzyme lock and key model, it's a small concept that you probably did in 8th class biology as well. The lock and key model is that enzymes are these complicated molecules which have a very specific shape, as can be seen over here. So this is an enzyme, it has an active site, it has a very specific shape. All biological molecules, they're very complicated. And if you're studying bio, you know that there's a primary structure, then there's a secondary, then there's a tertiary and a quaternary structure. So enzymes are these large globular proteins, and they have a very specific active site, a very specific shape. So if a molecule is going to come, or a cell or any other substance is going to come and react with it, it has to have a complementary shape. That is what is specificity. It's going to be very specific. It can't react with anything. And the active site would combine with the substrate to form an enzyme substrate complex, and then obviously there's going to be a reaction. As I mean, this one is showing that reaction. Uh, so, so all biological molecules are very shape specific. They only react with other molecules if the shape matches, because biological molecules, organic molecules are big. They're bigger in size, which leads to very specific shapes. And interaction is only possible if the other molecule has a complementary shape. So you'll be asked about this thing, lock and key model. So you're saying which statement describes the specificity of maltase? Uh, so you're saying maltase is a biological catalyst, and it is a type of protein. So probably A is the correct option. Uh, which statement describes the specificity of maltase? Because it's a biological catalyst, so I'm assuming it's going to be A. We can check this one. It's most effective between pH 6.1 and 6.8, lowers the activation energy of the reaction it catalyzes, which is true.
Sir, 11 is D.
Honey, that's D. Okay, I did not read D. Only speeds up a small number of chemical reactions. So it's actually reason it speeds up a small number of reactions is that it only matches a small number of substrates. Okay, the lock and key model over here. Okay, it can't react with any other substrate. So that is what specificity is. Maltase only speeds up a small number of chemical reaction, only reacts with a small number of substances. So specificity is basically linking up properly with this one. Okay, so it is D. Clear? Is this clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, next one is which description of the bonding and acid-base nature of aluminum oxide is correct? It is amphoteric. That is the acid-base nature. That's what we did in organic chemistry, that it's amphoteric. And the bonding in aluminum oxide is ionic. So it's going to be C and amphoteric. Do you remember we did the nature of oxides of period 3 oxides? Sodium oxide, magnesium oxide were basic, aluminum oxide was amphoteric. Silicon oxide was weakly acidic, and then you had acidic oxides, phosphorus oxides, and sulfur oxides. Now, this one is X and Y elements in the third period. X and Y are individually heated in excess chlorine. Each product is purified and then separated, added to water. So basically, he's making chlorides. So he's talking about chlorides. So it's NaCl, MgCl2, SiCl4. Both solutions have a pH of less than 5. What could be X and Y? So he's adding the chlorides are purified and then separately added to water. So the first one, NaCl. Remember, NaCl is neutral. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't hydrolyze. It just mixes in water, dissolves. So nothing should happen to its pH. Phosphorus chloride, that's very acidic because it hydrolyzes strongly in water. If you add water, it forms phosphoric acid. And at the same time, it also forms HCl. So that's strongly acidic. So that's not the option because he wants both of them to be acids. Uh, this one, MgCl2, and AlCl3. Now, AlCl3 has a strong hydrolysis. It reacts vigorously with water and forms a precipitate of aluminium hydroxide, and at the same time, it produces HCl. So there is strong hydrolysis, and the pH would be very less than 5. It's going to be strongly acidic. Meanwhile, for MgCl2, we studied that MgCl2, it doesn't really hydrolyze much. It mostly dissolves. Although there would be some magnesium hydroxide and HCl, some hydrolysis would be happening, but very, very less. And the pH was around 6.5. It was very weakly acidic. So that's also not the correct option. And I also explained why hydrolysis was happening. Like, why couldn't Na+1 hydrolyze water? The reason was that Na+1 would attract the water molecules, but not that strongly. So sodium ions would go into water and they wouldn't do anything to water. Meanwhile, on the other hand, if you have aluminium +3 and there's a water molecule that's sticking to it, aluminium is +3, which means that it would be attracting the water molecule very strongly. And at the same time, it would be repelling the hydrogen in water very, very strongly, which is why the H+1 ions, they break off, and aluminium hydroxide is formed because aluminium ions are +3 and they break down water, they hydrolyze water, and hydrolysis happens. The OH comes and sticks to aluminium +3, and the H+1, it gets repelled, which results in the formation of HCl. So the correct option is going to be, again, MgCl2 is not the correct option. The correct option is going to be D. Because silicon chloride and phosphorus chlorides, they have strong hydrolysis. They both form acids and they strongly hydrolyze in water. So it's going to be D. Okay, so remember the hydrolysis of these compounds. Then the next one, which question was this? So the next one is, I think this one, page 6. I said this one, an ore contains magnesium carbonate and barium carbonate. A sample of the ore is dissolved in nitric acid. How could the solution be processed into a magnesium compound and a separate barium compound? So the ore contains magnesium carbonate and barium carbonate, and he's reacting it with nitric acid. So basically, a nitrate salt would be produced. The carbonate would react to form magnesium nitrate, and barium carbonate would react to form it's going to form barium nitrate. Now, how could the solution be processed into a magnesium compound and a separate barium compound? So uh, you need to separate them into magnesium and barium compounds. Nitrates are very soluble, which means that they would be completely mixed in water and mixed with each other. So the first one is adding HCl and filtering off the barium chloride. So adding HCl would adding HCl would filter off the barium chloride. That's not possible because barium chloride is soluble. You can't really filter off a compound that's soluble. So remember the solubility of the compounds. The next one is add HCl and filter off this solid magnesium chloride. Magnesium chloride would not be solid because it's also soluble. The next one is add H2SO4 and filter off the solid. Filter off the barium sulfate. That is possible because barium sulfate is insoluble. And the last one is again not possible because magnesium sulfate is a soluble compound. You don't filter off soluble compounds. So it's going to be C. And how is it going to be C? Because of ionic precipitation. That if the solution contains barium ions, it contains nitrate ions, it contains magnesium ions, so all these ions are dissociated in solution. And if you add sulfuric acid to it, there would be H plus 1 and SO4 minus 2. So this one, this is ionic precipitation. That if you have barium ions and nitrate ions, that's barium nitrate, magnesium nitrate, they're all soluble. So if compounds are soluble, they all dissociate in aqueous state. And if you add sulfuric acid, that's also a soluble compound, and sulfuric acid will also mix with water to form H plus 1 and SO4 minus 2 ions, and your solution would have all these ions just roaming around. And two of the ions, if they get together, they're going to form an insoluble solid, which is barium sulfate, and they would leave the solution in the form of a precipitate. So you would start seeing a solid precipitate settling at the bottom. That would be barium sulfate, and that solid precipitate can be filtered off. So that's the way barium sulfate could be removed from the solution. And what would be left in the solution would be your magnesium compound. Magnesium ions would remain in the solution and barium sulfate would be removed from the solution. Okay, is this clear to everyone? Ethan, is this clear? Rida, Heba, is this clear? Bhaskar, is this clear?
Yes.
So then the next one is when calcium and calcium hydride react separately with water, they produce a white solid and a colorless gas. The white solid is the same compound in each reaction. Which statement is correct? So calcium and calcium hydride react separately with water. So in both cases, my guess is that if you react calcium with water, calcium hydroxide is going to be produced. That's the white solid. It's partially soluble. Plus hydrogen gas is released. And he's saying that in both cases, they produce a white solid and a colorless gas. So the other reaction, CaH2 with water, is probably going to do the same. So it's going to produce calcium hydroxide and H2 gas is going to be released, probably 2 moles. So H2 gas is going to be released. So which statement is correct? The calcium and both produce. So the first one is that the white solid is the same compound in each case. It has to be probably the same compound. I mean, they're actually stating that white solid is the same compound in each reaction. So this is probably the white solid. And the other thing that's left is probably going to be hydrogen gas. So both calcium and CH2 produce O2 gas. That's definitely incorrect. The first one looks correct. I have no issues with the first one. The second one is definitely there's no oxygen gas. Ca produces H2 and CH2 produces O2. That's also incorrect. And so my guess is both of them are producing H2 gas. If the white solid is the same one, so the oxygen get used up over here, and you'll be left with spare hydrogen. That's what you're going to get if CaH2 is going to react. The next one is concentrated sulfuric acid is added to sodium chloride. HCl is formed, but not Cl2. When concentrated sulfuric acid is added to I2, sodium iodide, I2 is formed. This is something that we studied in inorganic. What I-1 was a very good reducing agent because it really likes to lose electrons. Why? Because it's a bigger ion. And meanwhile, I told you that Cl-1 was not a reducing agent because it's a smaller atom, doesn't like to lose electrons. So the reason you did not get a redox reaction over here, and the reason you did not get Cl2 over here is that Cl-1 ions, they don't like to lose electrons. Chlorides don't like to lose electrons. So no Cl2 is formed. But iodide, I-1 likes to lose electrons to form iodine. So I-1 is a good reducing agent. It would lose electrons to form iodine. So which statement explains these observations? Sulfuric acid is an oxidizing agent and chloride ions are more easily oxidized. That's wrong. Cl-1s, they don't like to lose electrons. This statement looks correct. Iodide ions are more easily oxidized. So it's either B or D. Um, and sulfuric acid in this case would be acting as the oxidizing agent because iodide ions would be acting as the reducing agent. So option B is going to be the correct option in this case. Then let's. ठीक है, is this clear? Ibrar, Bazga, is this clear? Rida, Hiba, is this clear? Minahil?
Yes, sir.
Now next one. Silver chloride and iodide form equilibrium when added to water. So this is AgCl in equilibrium with its ions and AgI in equilibrium with its ions. Each equilibrium position lies well to the left. Well to the left means that there are more chances of the solid precipitate forming. So they both tend to form. They both tend to form solid precipitates. And that is exactly what happens. Silver nitrate, if you add silver nitrate, you get a precipitate. Silver iodide will not dissolve in aqueous ammonia. Silver chloride will dissolve in aqueous ammonia. Another equilibrium is formed. So silver ions with NH3, they form this thing. The position of this equilibrium lies to the right. So what is the order of magnitude for these three equilibriums? So this one, now starting with this one, and we have to mention which equilibrium is. So this position lies to the right. So let's focus on this one. This one is lying far to the right, which means more products, less reactants at equilibrium, which means that the Kc is going to be products over reactants. So if you have more products and you have less reactants, so the Kc value is going to be very high. So K3 is probably having the highest equilibrium value. So that's number one. K3 forms pretty much the, the equilibrium is lying well to the right. So it's going to be K3 is going to have the highest value. Okay, is this clear? Minahil, is this clear? Ethan, Mohammed, is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
As the next part is like each equilibrium position lies well to the left. So he's saying silver iodide will not dissolve in aqueous ammonia. Silver chloride will dissolve in aqueous ammonia. Another equilibrium is formed. So now the thing is, what you have to focus on is which one between K1 and K2, which one is more to the left or more to the right? Which one forms a greater precipitate? So the thing is that AgI does not dissolve. It has an insoluble precipitate, right? Why does it have an insoluble precipitate? I mean, you know this, silver iodide forms a yellow precipitate, which is insoluble in ammonia. Okay? It has an insoluble precipitate in NH3. Now, if it has an insoluble precipitate in NH3, and what is NH3 doing? If you look over here, why do the precipitates dissolve in NH3 in the first place? That when you add NH3, silver ions go and react with NH3. So that means that in the equilibrium, if you add NH3 to this, silver ions are going to be used up if you add NH3. So silver ions are going to get used up if you add NH3. And if silver ions are used up, so according to Lee-Shatler principle, the equilibrium would shift forward, right? So adding ammonia would dissolve some of the precipitate. But the problem is, I mean, that's what the silver ions are doing. They're adding NH3, the silver ions, they react with it to form this complex ion. So the amount of silver ions would automatically get reduced in the solution by adding NH3. But the thing is that AgI is a very insoluble precipitate. That means there are not a lot of silver ions to begin with. In the first one, AgCl, it dissolves. It is soluble in NH3. So that means there would be a big quantity of silurines in the solution. And when you add NH3, those silurines are removed and the equilibrium automatically shifts to the right. So one of the reasons is that AgI is so insoluble is that it's more to the left. If it's more to the left, the amount of reactants would be greater and the amount of products would be a lot lesser. And the Kc value would be very small. So K2 is probably going to be it's going to be having the smallest value because it's not soluble. Okay, if you remember, AgI precipitates are not soluble. So that means it refuses, I mean, the equilibrium is so much to the left that it's very hard to actually make it go to the right. This one, on the other hand, would probably be in somewhere in the middle, that it's much easier for it to go to the right side, or it has a tendency to go to the right side. So there would be kind of more products over here, and the equilibrium could easily shift to the right. So there would be probably more ions present in the first equilibrium compared to the left one. This one is very insoluble, so it's probably completely forming this thing. Okay, is this point clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, for the rest, is this clear to everyone? Minal, is this clear? Rida, Hiba?
Yes, sir.
And the next one is elements in the compounds are important as catalyst. In which process is a compound used rather than an element? That's contact process, it's P2O5. Uh, Haber process is ammonia, that's iron. Hydrogenation of alkenes, that's nickel. Catalytic converter, that's platinum or palladium. P2O5, that's a compound. The gaseous product of heating a mixture of calcium hydroxide are passed through solid calcium oxide. This absorbs water vapor and a gas W is collected. A sample of W is oxidized by Cl2 to produce two gases X and Y. X is an element, Y is, so you have to figure out. Let's start with the first thing. So it's a long question. Calcium hydroxide and ammonium salt. That's an acid-base reaction, or an ammonium salt with a base. The ammonium salt acts as an acid. It releases H+1 ions to form NH3. The OH ions, they act as a base. They gain H+1 to form water. And what's left behind? It's calcium and Cl. That's your salt. So this is the reaction. So it's saying the gaseous products of heating a mixture of calcium hydroxide, and so I think these are the two gaseous products. He's heating the mixture, so I think water is probably in gaseous state. So you're seeing this absorbs water vapor and a gas W. So W is probably, he's already mentioned the water vapors. So gas W is definitely ammonia. So ammonia is getting absorbed by calcium oxide. And then he's saying a sample of W is oxidized by Cl2 to produce two gases X and Y. So just a second. I pass this solid calcium oxide. This absorbs water vapor and a gas. I mean, that's definitely NH3. W is collected. So this is W. A sample of W is oxidized by Cl2. So something is happening with NH3, something is happening to NH3, and we have no idea. It's some reaction going on with Cl2. And they end up producing two gases. The two gases are X and Y. So something happens between NH3 and Cl2 and it produces X and Y gases. X is an element. So this one is an element. So which element could it be? You're given two options over here. Look at the options. It's either nitrogen or oxygen. It can't be oxygen because there is no oxygen anywhere. So it's my hunch is it's probably nitrogen. I mean, you don't even have oxygen in the first place. So it's either going to be A. It's either going to be A or B. What could be the other thing then? The other thing uh, could possibly be, let me just confirm, this absorbs water and a gas W. So W is definitely NH3. So the other thing is definitely going to be NH4Cl. I mean, that's the only thing that's possible because you can't get calcium from anywhere. So we would have to check the answer for this. Uh, my hunch is it's B because if you're sure, W is definitely NH3 gas. and a gas W. I mean, it has to be NH3 gas. That's the only gas other than the water vapor that's getting produced. Does anyone have an answer for this in the marking scheme? Let me just open the. Let me just check quickly. Hmm.
It says in the marking scheme 19B. Yeah.
ठीक है यही है ना. That's it. Because it can't be. I mean, there is no calcium compound, so calcium is out. There's no oxygen, so that's also eliminated. So you just have to do a process of elimination to figure out what the products are. Now the next one is moving to page 8 now. Okay, so let's start with organic questions. How many chiral centers are present in each molecule of G? So you have a molecule in front of you, and how many chiral centers are present? This is chiral when four different groups are attached. The H are not shown. So there's an H, and on all four sides, you have different groups. This one is not chiral because there would be two hydrogens. This one is also not chiral. There would be two hydrogens, two hydrogens. This one is going to be chiral because all four sides are going to be different. Similarly, this one would be chiral because all four sides are different. So that's the only two. This is not going to be chiral because it has same groups. The end ones over here, that's CH3. So they're not chiral. The red lines show hydrogen. This is also not chiral. Any carbon with a double bond is not chiral. So that's 3. Next one is there's a molecule and the major product is X. He's reacting it with HBr. So it's an alkene. It's obviously an alkene. What happens to an alkene? The double bonds they go away, and an H and a Br is attached. Now the many different possibilities for this molecule. The major product would be that the H would get bonded to the carbon which already has more H, and the Br would get bonded to the carbon which has fewer H's. That was the Markovnikov's rule. Same over here, the double bond would go away. The H will get added to the carbon which already had two hydrogens, and the other one will be attached to Br. But it could be the other way around as well. There could be a. He's saying actually he's only talking about the major product, so we have to follow the Markovnikov's rule, which was that the H atom always bonds to the carbon in the double bond that's already bonded to more hydrogens. I mean, this one was bonded to two hydrogens, uh, and this one was also bonded to one hydrogen. If I bring in the hydrogen, there would be one hydrogen. So this is the major product, and so the correct answer, the correct option is going to be, it's going to be this one. Not this one. I think this one. The BR has to go over there, so it's going to be D. D is going to be your correct option because if you look carefully, this is the same molecule I've drawn. The Br is attached to this carbon atom, so it is attached to that carbon atom, and the other Br is attached to this carbon atom, so it is attached to this carbon atom and followed by CH3. So it's going to be D. Is this clear? Ethan, Mohammed, is this clear? Now, next one, which statement is not correct? So combustion of PVC. What is PVC in the first place? That's a polymer. That's you make plastic pipes out of them, PVC tiles, etc. PVC is an ethene molecule with the monomer is polyvinyl chloride, or it's basically chloroethene. That one of the H is substituted by a Cl and it forms a polymer. The double bond in the middle, they break into a single bond and they start connecting with other molecules similar to it. Okay, just 1 second, I lost the board. So, and they link up. So that's N, that's a PVC molecule. Now, combustion of PVC produces a highly acidic gas. That is correct because it has Cl, and the chances of of the production of HCl. So that the first one is true. PVC molecules are saturated. That's also correct because it's all bonds are single bonds. So that's also correct. The empirical formula of the PVC is the same as the empirical formula of the monomer. For all addition polymers, that statement is true because you're not adding, because all the molecules are getting added. So the end result is they're going to have the same ratio of the atoms. And the repeat unit of PVC, that's given incorrectly because it only has one Cl, not two Cls. So that statement is the one that's incorrect. So it's going to be D. The next one is presence of a halogen in an organic compound may be detected by the warming I mean, this is the silver nitrate reaction, which we did earlier as well. Which compound would be giving the quickest to produce a precipitate? Which bond is the weakest? The weakest one is this one, is the C iodine bond. Bigger atoms, they form weaker bonds. So I minus 1 would break off very easily and it would react with Ag plus 1 to form an AgI precipitate. So that would be the quickest precipitate that you're going to get. The CF bond is very strong. It probably might not even break in the first place. And it won't produce ions. So the Ci bond, that would be the fastest reaction. Okay, Bhaskar, is this clear? Minahil, is this clear? So then you have halogenoalkanes react with NaOH aqueous either by SN1 or SN2 mechanism. SN1 is for tertiary halogenoalkanes. SN2 is for primary halogenoalkanes. Now the mechanism followed by the reaction depends on the structure of the halogenoalkane. Now the question is about 3-bromo-3-ethyl pentane. Now by just looking at the molecule, you know it's a tertiary halogenoalkane. We can draw it. There's a CBr and there's a C2H5 branch, another C2H5 branch, and another C2H5 branch, right? So this would follow an SN1 mechanism. What's the SN1 mechanism? The Br is going to break off first, and it would form or result in the formation of a carbocation. So it would be C2H5, the middle carbon would become a carbocation. And what's the reason why a stable carbocation would be formed? Because uh, it's going to get electrons from all sides, big groups attached on all sides. So the positive charge would not be very large. And that's the reason why the Br minus 1 is more likely to break off because it's not going to get attracted to the carbocation. And then the next step, OH minus 1, if the concentration is high enough, would come and bond with it to form the alcohol. So SN1, it's either A and B. The mechanism is SN1 due to the stabilization of an intermediate anion by three alkyl groups. You're not stabilizing the anion, you're actually stabilizing the cation. So the correct option is B. That with three alkyl chains, the carbocation is very stable and it doesn't attract the Br minus 1 back because the positive charge is not very large to begin with because the positive charge is surrounded by large groups. So it gets its electrons from other places. So the positive charge is not very huge. So that is why tertiary halogenoalkanes, they prefer to form a carbocation first. Okay, is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Sir.
Okay, then you have which compound is a secondary alcohol that can be dehydrated to form an alkene with an MR of 70? So alcohols, they get dehydrated. So they lose their OH and an H from the neighboring carbon atom. The H could be from any of the neighboring carbon atom. So every time a water molecule is produced, so that means a loss in MR of 18. So we don't care what the molecule is, we're just going to look at the MR. Find the total MR, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbon atoms. So that's 60. 12 into 5 is 60. And then there's OH, that's 17. And you can count the number of hydrogens. So there would be 3 over here, 2 over here, 3 over here, 3 over here. No, none over here. So that's 3 plus 3, that's and 3, 9, 9 plus 2, 11. So what is the total MR? 77.
88. जी.
That's 88. और फिर 20% you have to remove the water. So that I think is
70.
that's exactly giving you 70. So it's definitely A, but that's not the answer. Why is it not the answer?
Because it's not a secondary alcohol.
Okay, we shouldn't have wasted our time in the first place on this because it wasn't a secondary alcohol. This one is a secondary alcohol. This one is also a secondary alcohol. This one is also a I mean, the first one was a tertiary alcohol. The rest, so you have to look at the rest. Um, and what you have to, we can just figure out the number of carbon atoms. We need 5 carbon atoms, right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I think this would do. This would probably make 70 because it's an isomer of the first one. This one has 4 carbon atoms, so the MR would be quite different. So that's, and this one I think has more than 5. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Actually, both of them have 5. So which compound? So it's either B or D. Both of them would have an MR of. Achha, this one is not going to give you 70. Okay, it's a cyclic compound. I mean, this is going to be incorrect. Count the number of carbon atoms. That's 5. So that's 60. 60. Plus there is oxygen. That's 16 plus 1 hydrogen. And how many hydrogens do you have? That's 2, 2, 2, and 2. So that's 8 more. What do you get? That would be 68 plus 17. Ibrar, what's the total for this?
85. जी.
That's 85. And if it gets dehydrated, the OH is removed and the H is removed from the neighboring, so that's a loss of 18. So that's not 17. Okay, so it's going to be B. Then, so which question are we on? Page number 10. Mic किसी का on है. Now focus on this question. Now, 0.075 moles of alcohol X are completely burnt in excess oxygen and the gases are produced passed through in excess of lime water. 3 grams of calcium carbonate are produced. When X is warmed with acidified potassium dichromate 6, there's a color change from orange to green. So it's changing color from orange to green. So it's probably an alcohol or an aldehyde. But the only options that you're given are alcohols. And all of them are alcohols. Except for B. B can't be oxidized. B is a tertiary alcohol. So we can leave that out. Primary alcohol, secondary alcohol, secondary alcohol. These can be oxidized. So it's either A, C, or D. So there's 0.075 moles and it's forming. So I'm going to do this in reverse. First find the moles of calcium carbonate. So calcium carbonate would be 3 grams divided by the MR, which is 100. So it's how many? 0.03 moles? Correct me if I'm wrong. How is calcium hydroxide produced when calcium carbonate produced when, I mean, the question says that calcium hydroxide solution is absorbing carbon dioxide, right? That would result in the formation of calcium carbonate. So it basically takes 1 molecule of carbon dioxide to produce 1 molecule of calcium carbonate. So the moles of carbon dioxide are exactly going to be the same. So in the reaction, it's 0.03 moles of carbon dioxide that is getting produced. Okay, is this clear? Mohammed, is this clear? Zaib, is this clear? So it's 0.03 moles of carbon dioxide that are getting produced. How much alcohol did you have? How much alcohol were you burning in the first place? It's 0.0075 moles. That's the X that you were burning to get how many moles of carbon dioxide? That's 0.03 moles of carbon dioxide gas, right? Can anyone tell me what the whole number ratio is?
One is to four.
So that means one molecule is producing 4 carbon dioxide molecules. The only way that's possible is that the molecule had 4 carbon atoms. Like if you burn any molecule that has 4 carbon atoms, it's going to produce 4 carbon dioxide molecules, right? So I figured out the number of carbon atoms, and that's 4, because that's the only way a molecule could produce 4 carbon dioxide gas molecules. So it's going to be 4. So C and D are no longer correct options. They are gone. B was already gone because it was a tertiary alcohol, doesn't get oxidized, and you're left with A.
Sir, can you explain the second step where you decomposed calcium carbonate into hydroxide and carbon dioxide?
ठीक है, I'm explaining this, ठीक है? Yeah, I'm not decomposing it. I started with the reverse. Well, he said that there was an alcohol X which was burning and it was producing gases. Now, when you burn something, carbon dioxide gas is produced, right? And he said that carbon dioxide gas was absorbed by lime water, calcium hydroxide. Carbon dioxide was absorbed by lime water, which is calcium hydroxide, to produce calcium carbonate. So he's saying 3 grams of calcium carbonate were produced, right? So you can write the equation, you can balance this equation, but it's very obvious that to produce 1 calcium carbonate, uh, there's going to be 1 carbon dioxide gas that's going to be absorbed. Okay, Ibrar, is this clear? Minhail, is this clear?
Yes, sir.
So they gave us the mass of calcium carbonate, which was 3 grams. I divided by the MR and I found the moles, which were 0.03 moles. Right? So we got 0.03 moles of calcium carbonate, which are only possible if you had 0.03 moles of carbon dioxide getting absorbed in calcium hydroxide to give you this. So I figured out the moles of carbon dioxide, right? You be clear, Ibrar, is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And then the last part was, where was all this carbon dioxide getting produced? Because you had burnt 0.075 moles of an alcohol, which was X, and you were getting 0.03 moles of carbon dioxide. And we figured out the whole number ratio is that if you burn 1 molecule of X, you get 4 carbon dioxides, and that's only possible if the molecule has 4 carbon atoms. Okay? If you burn any molecule which has 4 carbon atoms, you're going to get 4 carbon dioxide molecules. So that means the molecule had 4 carbons in it. Okay? Is this clear, Minhail? Ibrar, is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And then the next part was it was also getting oxidized, potassium dichromate 6. Now, so it's either A or B, 4 carbon atoms. These are the only 2 molecules with 4 carbon atoms. But it cannot be B because B is a tertiary alcohol. And tertiary alcohols, they don't get oxidized. Whereas he was saying that it was changing color with potassium dichromate 6. So hence the only option left is A. Okay, C and D were removed because they were eliminated because they just had 3 carbon atoms. Okay, is this clear to everyone? Bhaskar, is this clear? Ethan, Mohammed?
Yeah, that's clear.
So next is, this is the. So these are the questions related to isomers are problematic. Considering only structural isomers, so no mention about stereo isomers, no cistrons, no chiral or enantiomers. So what is the number of alcohols of each type with the formula C5H12 and O? And you only have to figure out the number of alcohols. So start figuring out number of alcohols. Remember to draw them without the hydrogens. It makes things a lot simpler, at least for me. So that's one. OH is on the last one. OH on the second one. That's another one. So what else? OH on the middle one. So we're done with positional isomers, right? I mean, these are the only 3 possible positional isomers I could make. Now I'm going to focus on the chain. So the chain isomers would be, I can have 4 carbon atoms in a row, and one carbon atom could be a branched carbon. Now the branching, that's the only possible arrangement in this. Four in a line, one branched. Now start figuring out positional isomers on this. So the OH could be at the end. Now it doesn't matter the OH is either on this carbon atom or this carbon atom. It's going to give you the same molecule. So what's the other version of this? It could be OH on the second one, or you could have OH. So you could have OH on the second one from the left, or you could have OH on this side. Now remember, in this arrangement, all positions are different. Okay, except these two positions, OH over here and OH over here, they're exactly the same. But otherwise, on these four carbon atoms, all positions would be different. The arrangement is going to be different. So OH could be over here, could be over here, could be over here, or could be over here. They're all four different possible arrangements. So what else apart from this? Let's make another branched isomer. Okay, so isomer questions are just a waste of time. They're just very, very time consuming. And the biggest problem with them is you might miss out on an isomer. There's a very high probability you might overlook or might just miss an isomer. So the last one is three carbon atoms in a line, and the middle carbon atom has two. That's the only possibility, right? And it will have only one isomer because putting OH at any position, like you can't put OH over here because the bonds are already complete. Putting OH over here, over here, or over here, it's going to be the same thing. So these are all the possible isomers. Now you have to figure out and classify them into primary, secondary, and tertiary alcohols. So that's another problem. So that's the first one is primary. The second one is secondary, two carbon chains. What about this one? Secondary. What about this one? Again, it's primary. This one is tertiary, so that we got one tertiary as well. So where is the then this one looks like a primary. This one is a secondary, two carbons attached to it, and this one is also a primary. So count the number of we have one tertiary, and I think we have two secondaries. Let's focus on that. One tertiary, two secondary. So I think it's going to be D. Okay, and even with this, you have to really check the marking scheme too. That did we cover all of them or did we miss anyone? Okay, is this clear? And can somebody check it's D or not?
27 is C in the marking scheme.
That means we drew the right number of isomers, but we classified them incorrectly. Which one did we not classify correctly? Actually, the three secondaries. We wrote three. We counted them incorrectly, so we made a mistake in the counting. So there's this secondary, and secondary. So that's three secondaries. So that's three secondaries. So it's going to be C. Because we made a mistake in counting. So we've got three secondary alcohols. Two are here and one over there. Okay, is this clear? As a next, is a student carried out a two-stage synthesis in which CH3, CH2, CH2Br was converted into a carboxylic acid. One thing that you would notice very quickly is, and always notice this, three carbon atoms, and all of a sudden you have four carbon atoms. Now there's one reaction that does that increases the carbon chain length, and that's a nucleophilic substitution of Br. So it's a nucleophilic substitution of Br with Cn. Like you can substitute it with OH, you can substitute it with NH3, but also Cn. So that's the only one that increases the length of the carbon chain. So it's going to be D. You have to increase the length of the carbon chain. And then the CN can be hydrolyzed. The CN breaks down into carboxylic acid. So this RCN, if you heat it with an acid, it breaks down into a carboxylic acid, and an ammonium ion is produced as well. So always look for the increase in the carbon chain length. Whenever a carbon chain length increases, you go from 3 carbon atoms to 4 carbon atoms, that definitely means that a CN is getting attached. Then this one, an ester X has the structural formula this, and can be prepared by heating an alcohol via the reflux with ethanoic acid and an acid catalyst. So you just have to figure out the molecule, the alcohol molecule. So just draw this molecule quickly without the, so it's C, then there's CO2 with that acetyl bond O and O, and then there is another C with a CH3 branch, and then there's two more C's after that, right? So that's your ester. You need to break this molecule. Break this molecule. This side becomes the ethanoic acid side, and this side becomes the alcohol side. So which alcohol is this? This is 4 carbon atoms and OH on the second one. So it's B. It's butane 2-ol. Okay, is this clear as well?
Yes, sir, but in this ester, we're not completing the the 4 bonds that are being made by the carbon
Nee, which one?
on this carbon on the alcohol one, where the carbon is
ये
that.
वाला?
ये वाला 2 मिनट wait.
Nee,
ये वाला.
अच्छा, nee, I'm not drawing the hydrogens. Well, the rest is all hydrogens. I'm just
अच्छा
stating.
ठीक सही.
Okay. Remember, you don't have time to draw. You don't have a lot of time. You just have 1 minute to solve this question. You can't go about drawing the hydrogens as well. Okay. So just focus on the carbon atoms. That's one carbon, another carbon. Then there's CO2. That's acetyl bond O and O. Then there's another carbon atom here, and that carbon has a branch of a single carbon atom and 2 carbons in front of that. The rest are all hydrogens. CH3, CH2. This is CH, CH3.
नहीं ठीक है, got it. सही.
I said, which page, which question was this? This was, so let's do this one. So this one is about infrared spectroscopy. So compound S can be extracted from natural compounds. Reacting S with hot concentrated KMnO4 produces the organic compound T. So this is S over here. Some of the absorptions found in the infrared spectra of S and T are described. So, what's infrared spectrum? Infrared spectrum is that if you have any bond, it vibrates. For example, if you have, so just briefly going over infrared spectrum. For example, if you have this molecule, you have a ketone, and this is the exact shape. It's fan shaped. Now these bonds they swing side to side. They vibrate, and why do they vibrate? When they absorb infrared radiation, they become energetic and they start vibrating. So all these frequencies that are absorbed are being absorbed in the infrared spectrum by these bonds, because these bonds they tend to absorb these infrared frequencies, and they're given in your data booklet. Now he's saying that S has no strong absorptions between 1670 and 1740. So just go and open a data booklet. Hopefully I have a data booklet somewhere, or maybe I don't. Actually, I don't. 1 second. So in the data booklet, infrared spectrum, the infrared spectrum is kind of useless. It doesn't really tell you or give you much information. It only gives you a very tiny amount of information. So where's the spectrum? This one. Now, the few things that you can easily actually identify in the infrared spectrum are the serial bond O vibrations. The frequencies for amide serial bond O can exist in esters, they can exist in aldehydes, ketones, and also in amides. So the C double bond O, they have a very strong and unique absorption at the 1600, 1700 range, which is different from all the others. So this is one bond that can be very uniquely identified. Now he's saying that there is no absorption within this range. The question is saying, so that means there is no C double bond O in S. So that's the information that you get. That S has no strong absorption in this range. But T has a very strong absorption at 1720. So T has C double bond O. I'm going to write it over here. It has C double bond O. S has no C double bond O. I mean, that is one thing that we got from the NMR spectrum. And then he says something else about T, that T has no strong or broad absorption between 2500 and 3000. So what does that mean, strong and broad absorption? So if you again open the data booklet, which is over here. So 2500 and so there is an OH bond that is vibrating, and that OH bond belongs to carboxylic acid. And that has a strong and very broad absorption in this range. So that means it's not a carboxylic acid. I mean, that's guaranteed. It's not a carboxylic acid. So T is not carboxylic acid. So this is gone. Where else do you see a carboxylic acid? This one is a carboxylic acid as well. That's gone. So I've eliminated two of them. And the first one, there's no C double bond O. Over here, there is a CO. So we can get rid of this one as well. So without even solving the question, what is the correct answer? The only option left is B. Okay, that's the only option that we have left over here. Okay, so just remember about infrared spectrum that it tells you very few bonds. Bonds vibrate, they absorb energies, frequencies from the infrared spectrum. And in this question, there was no absorption at 1670 and 1740. That meant it wasn't a ketone. So which eliminated option C. Can't be a ketone, can't have CO. And the other one had a strong absorption. So that means it did have a C double bond O. But it did not have a strong absorption between 2500 and 3000, which means it wasn't a carboxylic acid. So these two were gone because they were carboxylic acids. So the only correct option would be B. Okay, is this clear? Is this clear to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we're going to end it over here. This is question number 30. We're going to continue from this point. Somebody should write this down. Okay, Bhaska, can you write this? This is,
Yes.
okay, let me write it. Okay, data. This is 6th. Okay. So we're going to continue again next time from this paper.
Sir,
Yes.
when will you send the timetable?
I'll send you the timetable today for the past paper.
Because I missed a class yesterday because I didn't know there was going to be one and I didn't know the time.
Okay. I'll work on it today.
Okay.
I'll work on this and I'll send you a timetable for this. Okay.
Chalo, okay, sir. Allah Hafiz.
Take care. Allah
Thank you.
Love.
Thank you.
Hafiz.
Bye-bye.
Okay.